It was a cold morning in May 1945 when Soviet photographer Valery Fominsky first set foot on the streets of Berlin. What his eyes witnessed in that moment was the end of an era, the capital of the Third Reich, which Hitler had promised would last 1,000 years, lay in ruins after merely 12 years of existence. Fominsky had accompanied the Red Army during the final months of the war, documenting with his Leica camera the Soviet march across Eastern Europe, but nothing had prepared him for what he would see in Berlin during those first days of May. Berlin in May 1945 was a dead city. 3 years of Allied bombing had reduced entire neighborhoods to mountains of rubble. The final operation, the Battle of Berlin, had begun on April 16th, when Marshal Georgy Zhukov ordered the final assault against the Nazi capital. For 2 weeks, more than 1.5 million Soviet, Polish, and other Red Army Allied soldiers fought brutal urban combat against German defenders. House by house, street by street, the city was conquered at the price of blood. When silence finally came on May 2nd, Berlin had become a cemetery of concrete and steel. Fominsky walked through avenues that had once been symbols of Nazi power. Wilhelmstrasse, where the Reich Chancellery stood, was now a succession of craters and roofless buildings. The Reichstag, where Hitler had consolidated his power, was burned and riddled with artillery shells. Everywhere the smell of death and destruction hung in the air. Fominsky's photographs capture Soviet soldiers in their first days as conquerors of Berlin. Some pose proudly before the rubble, displaying their medals and decorations. Others, exhausted after months of combat, simply rest on the steps of bombed buildings. These men had traveled thousands of kilometers from Stalingrad, Kursk, and Leningrad. Many had lost entire families in Nazi massacres in the Soviet Union. For them, being in Berlin was not just a military victory, it was just revenge for years of suffering. The photographer documented intimate moments. Soldiers reading letters from home, sharing captured German cigarettes, exploring ruins with childlike curiosity. They were ordinary men who had participated in extraordinary events. Some could barely read, others were engineers and teachers. All carried on their faces the marks of a war that had lasted almost 4 years. Among the rubble, the German population faced a new reality. Fominsky's photographs reveal a society in total collapse. Elderly women dug through debris looking for personal belongings. Children played among destroyed tanks, already accustomed to the presence of death. Berlin had lost more than a third of its population during the war. Of the 4.3 million inhabitants of 1939, fewer than 2.8 million remained in May 1945. Most were women, children, and the elderly. The men had died on the battlefronts or in the final battles for the city. Food rationing had collapsed. Entire families scavenged through the rubble looking for anything edible. Long lines formed whenever rumors spread of food distribution by the Soviets. The bourgeois dignity that had characterized Berlin society had disappeared, replaced by the basic struggle for survival. Fominsky photographed a German woman offering her gold watch to a Soviet soldier in exchange for a piece of bread. Orphaned children slept in flooded basements. Elderly people walked the streets carrying bundles with their last possessions, with no certain destination. Even amid complete devastation, life tried to resume its course. Soviet authorities quickly organized work brigades to clean main streets and remove the most dangerous debris. German women, nicknamed Trümmerfrauen, rubble women, formed long human chains to pass bricks and stones. Fominsky documented these first reconstruction efforts. His photographs show groups of German civilians, supervised by Soviet soldiers, working to unblock streets and avenues. It was Herculean work. It was estimated that Berlin had more than 400 million cubic meters of rubble. The irony was not lost on the photographer. The same hands that had built Nazi armament factories now worked to remove the debris of the regime they had served. Elderly men who might have applauded Hitler in 1933 now bowed before Soviet soldiers, asking permission to search for drinking water. One of Fominsky's most powerful series shows the symbols of the Nazi regime in ruins. The imperial bronze eagle, which had once crowned the Reich Chancellery, lay broken on the ground, covered with dust and debris. Swastikas carved in stone had been deliberately destroyed with hammers by Soviet soldiers. Hitler's bunker, where the Führer had spent his final days, was now just a hole in the ground filled with dirty water. The Soviets had systematically dynamited all the symbols of Nazi power they could find. Statues of Nazi leaders were toppled. Government buildings were looted and burned. Fominsky photographed Soviet soldiers posing before the ruins of the Chancellery, some holding red flags. In their faces, one could see not just pride in victory, but also deep satisfaction at having destroyed the center of evil that had devastated their homeland. Valery Fominsky was not just a neutral observer. Born in 1914 in Ukraine, he had grown up during the Russian Revolution and witnessed the horrors of forced collectivization. When the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Fominsky was already an experienced photographer working for Soviet newspapers. His photographs of Berlin reveal a unique perspective, that of the victor who does not celebrate, but documents. Fominsky was interested in small human details: a Soviet soldier sharing his ration with a German child, an elderly woman sweeping the rubble of her destroyed home, children playing in a bomb crater. The photographer understood that he was documenting a unique historical moment. Berlin in May 1945 was the epicenter of Europe's transformation. There, European fascism had been definitively defeated, but there also began the division that would mark the continent for the next decades. During the following weeks, Fominsky continued photographing the city. Gradually, a new order began to emerge from chaos. The Soviets established checkpoints, organized food distribution, and began implementing military administration. His photographs show the gradual transformation. Soviet soldiers directing traffic at cleaned intersections, organized lines of German civilians receiving identity documents, the first streetcars returning to circulate through central streets. But normalization was superficial. Berlin remained a traumatized city, divided between victors and vanquished, between the Nazi past and an uncertain future. The scars of war, physical and psychological, would take decades to heal. Fominsky's photographs constitute one of the most important visual records of the final days of World War II in Europe. Unlike propaganda films or official photographs, his images capture humanity amid destruction. Each photograph tells a story. The Soviet soldier offering cigarettes to German prisoners, the Berlin woman sweeping the rubble of her home with silent dignity, the children who transformed bomb craters into improvised playgrounds. Decades later, when historians try to understand what the end of the war in Europe was like, Fominsky's photographs offer a unique window into that moment. They show not just physical destruction, but also the destruction of a social order, a way of life, a worldview. May 1945 marked more than the end of World War II in Europe. It was the end of an era that had begun with the revolutions of 1848, passed through Bismarckian imperialism, survived World War I, and culminated in Nazi totalitarianism. Berlin, which had been the heart of Prussian militarism, German unification, and the Third Reich, was now reduced to rubble. The city that Hitler had dreamed of transforming into Germania, capital of a world empire, was now a field of ruins inhabited by ghosts. Fominsky's photographs document this moment of historical transition. They show the end of the old world and the first confused signs of the new world being born. In his images, we see not just the military defeat of Nazism, but also the beginning of the long division of Europe that would mark the Cold War. When Valery Fominsky put away his camera after those weeks in Berlin, he had created one of the most important visual records in 20th century history. His photographs allow us to be witnesses to a crucial moment, when humanity closed one of its darkest chapters. Berlin in May 1945 was a city where the past had died, but the future had not yet been born. It was a place where victors and vanquished shared the same scenario of destruction, where history transformed into rubble and where, slowly, life tried to flourish again. Fominsky's images remind us that war is not just a matter of military strategies and political decisions. It is also a profound human experience that transforms not only cities and countries, but also the people who live through it. Today, when we look at these photographs, we see more than historical documents. We see a testament to human capacity for both destruction and reconstruction, for both hatred and hope, and perhaps most importantly, we see a reminder that even in history's darkest moments, humanity finds ways to move forward.